My uncle, oh, my granddad, Antonio, was a very wealthy man. He made his fortune by um, establishing a chain of movie theater across America, and he grew a small business into um, multi-million dollar enterprise. And he is a pure example, prime example of a self-made man who went through from rags to riches. And grandpa always used to say that money doesn't grow on trees, and was his favorite saying. He taught his children and grandchildren the true value of money arising from hard work, perseverance, and ambition. And he earned his millions all by himself, without winning the lottery or getting an inheritance from his long lost uncle. And he knew what it is like to live from paycheck to paycheck, and when you cannot even afford a bus fare. So he was a very reasonable spender, and he didn't waste money, and he never threw money down the drain, never he never bought decent boats and expensive cars that cost a fortune. Instead of that, he make investments and put his savings into a bank. So I'm very proud of my grandpa. He got rich by doing what he loved, and he always he was very honest man, paying taxes and refusing taking bribes to officials, licensing officials. And at the same time, he was very generous. He was a generous philanthropist. He donated money to for children, and donated money for building schools in the poorest districts, and he established a fund providing grants and scholarships for students from poor background, living who were strapped to cash. And he often said that money spent on education is never spent in waste, never wasted. And he also made great donations to the companies or to the funds, business programs which supported immigrants and launched their startups. Antonio came to the United States 60 years ago from El Salvador, a small country in Central America, and he borrowed him money from his family back back at home, because he was a fresh off the boat immigrant. He was as poor as a church mouse, and so the family lent him money as much as they could to pay his trip to the USA. And in these first years he lived on a shoestring, and he, like most immigrants, he had just arrived in the land of opportunity. In search of fame and fortune, he took a serious, he took every low-paying, unskilled work to survive. He worked as a porter, shop assistant, a food cook, and a construction worker. And to make the ends meet, he had to work somewhere else. So he earned money in sweeping the floors in the nearest bus store, and he moonlighted as a security guard at a nightclub. And he is still, because he owed money to his family, to his relatives, and in El Salvador, so he had to work day and night to pay off his debts. And this hard time learned him to respect all people, no matter what they are and no matter what they do. And he always he always tipped waiters, taxi drivers, and other service industry workers, because he had been in their shoes, and he knew how to what it is like to be in need. Around that time he met his wife, our grandmother to be, and he was very shy to approach her, so he applied for a job at the movie theater where she worked, to see her every day, very often. And that is where he fell in love with the theater, with the cinema. And while my grandma fell in love with him, he bought he spent a great amount of money to a ring, to a diamond ring that cost him an arm and a leg, and they got married. Then he at that later he got promoted from a movie projectionist to a cinema manager, and in a few years he was running the entire theater, and now he can afford to buy a car and a bigger apartment for his family. And he now he had earned a sufficient amount of money, and he kept stashing money into his savings account, and he received an interest, and he started investing. So money makes more money, he said. By the late 1980s, he decided he had saved up enough money to start his own venture. So he took off $50,000 from his bank account, and he cashed out his stocks, and he put and withdrew his cash from the bank, and sank most of his savings into his small theater. So that is how he became business owner. And but unfortunately, this his first venture wasn't successful. It turned to be a failure because due to his lack of education and poor location choice. So everything was started very well, and so started off well, but business wasn't much profit, and Antonia was running out of money. So he had to take a loan and sell his car, but he went bankrupt all the same, and so he lost all his money and had to start from scratch. But in spite of that fact, Antonio didn't wasn't discouraged, and he so he instead of pitying himself, grandfather did his best to learn from his mistakes, and he got a business course, entrepreneurship course, and next year he came up with a business plan and started searching for sponsorship, and eventually he managed to find a few investors and raise enough capital to open his new theater, another movie theater. And over the years it grew into a chain of 60 locations across 34 states. So on his 80th birthday, Antonio decided to retire, and he went on a trip around the world. He said that he had reached everything he could ever dreamed about. And a couple years later he died, and our family inherited his business. So it's my turn to start the lead.